Just that. Bear didn't move. Didn't need to. He already had. The next morning, the social worker called again. She asked how it went. I told her what mattered. They were kind, I said. They were respectful. And Eva? She didn't cry. Pause. Is that good or bad? I smiled faintly. It's just true. Then I asked the question I'd been circling. What happens if she says no? Another pause. She's a minor, the woman said carefully. But her voice, it matters. It's not binding. But it's heard. And then, gently, but only if someone speaks it out loud for her. That evening, Bear brought the lamb to the door. He hadn't done that since the early days. He laid it carefully on the doormat. Then sat beside it. Watching. I opened the door. He didn't step outside. He didn't look at me. He looked at the lamb. And I realized he was waiting to see if I would carry it back inside. If I would protect it. If I would protect them. I knelt. Lifted the toy. Held it against my chest. And whispered. I'll speak. The next day, I wrote the letter. Not to the court. Not to the agency. To the judge. I told him about the bark at 3:08. About the photograph. About the language Bear and Eva had built without a single word. I told him what Eva had whispered. Stay. And what Bear had answered with, silence. Stillness. Surrender. Then I wrote the most honest sentence I had in me. I know the law cannot make room for instinct. But I'm asking you to make room for love. I dropped it off in person. Didn't sign it with a flourish. Just my name. Just the truth. Bear waited in the car. When I came back out, he didn't stand. But his eyes found mine. And I swear, he knew. The choice had been made. Not by the court. Not yet. But by me. By Eva. By the dog who remembered the scent of her name long after the world had forgotten. It came in the mail, on a morning that didn't feel like it would matter. A gray morning, with heavy clouds that hung low like thoughts not yet spoken. Eva was still asleep, curled beneath Bear's chest, the lamb cradled between her arms like it had been grown from her breath. And I stood at the window with a mug of tea gone cold, watching the mailbox sway gently in the wind. The envelope was small. No official seal this time. Just plain white. My name typed. Nothing more. Bear met me at the door when I returned inside. He didn't sniff the envelope. Didn't pace. He just sat. Watching. Like he'd already read it by the time I touched the flap. I opened it slowly, not out of dread but because part of me wanted to hold that last second before the world knew what we already did. Inside, just one page. Thick paper. No embellishments. Typed cleanly. After reviewing all written testimony, witness reports, and personal observation, the court has determined that permanent guardianship shall remain with the current caregiver, under the following conditions. My eyes blurred for a moment. I read the words again, more slowly. In consideration of the emotional, psychological, and demonstrated protective bond between the minor child and the animal known as Bear, and in accordance with recommendations from the department and primary pediatric consultation, no further transition of guardianship will be pursued. It didn't say, adoption. It didn't use the word, forever. But it said enough. She would stay. And so would he. I sat down on the floor. The letter still in my hand. Not crying. Not trembling. Just breathing in a way I hadn't let myself for a very long time. Eva appeared minutes later. Barefoot, hair tousled from sleep, the way only children can be when they've rested in absolute safety. She walked straight to Bear. Not to me. not to the letter. She pressed her cheek into the side of his neck. Closed her eyes. Bear didn't move. But I watched his tail curl softly around her leg. That was the only answer we needed. I didn't tell her what the paper said. Not then. There are truths that don't need to be said aloud to take root. Instead, I folded the letter and placed it behind the photograph. The one that lived in the nursery. The one with her mother smiling beside the younger bear. It was Eva's now. It always had been. The days that followed unfolded without ceremony. There was no party. No streamers. No knock on the door delivering a certificate or congratulations. Just Bear sleeping deeper. Eva humming more. And me feeling the space between what was and what might finally become. One night, I found Eva sitting on the rug, spreading out small objects around her like a circle. The lamb. A ribbon. A bottle cap. The old sock. And the photograph. She was telling a story. Not in words. Not in full sentences. But in sounds, gestures, pauses. Each item she touched, she looked to Bear. And each time, he leaned forward just slightly, as if acknowledging her memory, honoring its shape. And when she reached the photo she didn't point to her mother. She pointed to Bear. Then to herself. And finally to me. Then placed the photo gently in the center of the circle like a seal over a letter never mailed. A week later, I took her to the same park. The same willow trees. The same bench. Bear walked freely now, no leash. Not out of disobedience but because no leash had ever truly held him anyway. Eva stopped beneath the tallest tree. Reached up hands too small to grasp its hanging leaves. Bear sat beside her. She didn't ask for help. Instead, she looked at me. Then pointed to the leaves. I lifted her slowly. She grasped one light green, soft as breath. Held it to Bear's nose. He sniffed. Then licked her palm once. A blessing. Or a vow. She let the leaf go. It floated down between them. And I watched as her fingers found his fur again. We returned home to a new quiet. Not the silence of waiting. The silence of arrival. That night, Bear didn't sleep in the nursery. He slept at the foot of my bed. Eva curled beside him, half on the floor, half wrapped in the blanket she'd carried from her crib like a banner. The lamb pressed to Bear's chest. His eyes closed. Completely. I listened to their breathing. 2 patterns. 1 rhythm. Sometime after midnight, I dreamed of the crash. Not as I'd imagined it before, not as wreckage or panic. But as a sound. A scream. A baby. A mother reaching back. And Bear running. Into fire. Into smoke. Into sirens. Not because he was trained. Because he remembered the baby's scent better than he remembered the world before it. I woke with tears already on my cheeks. But no ache. Just the strange clarity that comes when memory finds its final place. I went to the nursery. Found them still sleeping. The photograph still upright. The lamb still warm. In the morning, I placed a new collar around Bear's neck. Soft brown leather. No tags. No address. Just one small brass plate, engraved in simple letters, Eva's. Later, when we walked past the tree where he used to wait, Bear paused. Only for a second. Then turned his head back. And kept walking. Not because he forgot. But because now he had someone to follow again. The seasons shifted almost without notice. The air changed before the trees did. Cooler mornings. Less light in the windows when we woke. Bear noticed it first. The way his ears twitched when wind rustled the trees. The way his breath condensed just slightly on the glass in the mornings. He started sleeping closer to Eva again, not out of need, but ritual. Like he knew there were certain seasons you only walk through together. Eva had begun to speak again. Not much. Not loudly. But she chose her words like stones in a river placed carefully, each one building on the last. Sometimes, it was a color. Other times, a name. And once, while we sat on the floor together folding towels, she turned to Bear, pressed her cheek into his side, and whispered, "Safe." She didn't look up. Didn't explain. She just closed her eyes and let the warmth of his body fill in the rest. There's a kind of peace that doesn't settle like silence. It settles like breath. It doesn't mean nothing ever hurts again. It just means the hurting doesn't take everything. That's what Bear gave her. Not protection, presence. And in his presence, Eva began to stretch out into the world again. She started sitting at the kitchen table with crayons. She didn't draw figures. Not people. Not scenes. Just circles. One after another. Some tiny. Some wide. Some layered with darker colors in the middle. I didn't ask what they were. But one day, she held one up to me. A single black circle at the center. Wrapped in layers of color, yellow, then blue, then green. And in the very outer ring, a soft gray. She pointed to the middle. Before. Then she pointed to the edges. Now. And then the softest sound, barely formed, together. I didn't frame the drawing. Didn't tape it to the fridge. I folded it gently and slipped it into the back of the photograph. Behind the court letter. Beside her mother's smile. Because it belonged in the story, even if no one else ever read it. One evening, I found Bear in the hallway, standing beside the closet. His body wasn't tense, but his gaze was fixed. I opened the door, expecting a sound, maybe a forgotten toy, or a scent he remembered. But there was only one thing in there. The old car seat. Still tucked behind the coats. Still dusted at the edges, as if time had tried to bury it without permission. I hadn't thrown it out. Couldn't. Not because of what it was, but because of who he had been beside it. Bear stepped forward. Sniffed it once. Then laid down directly in front of it. Not like he was guarding. Not like before. This time, it felt more like a gesture. A benediction. I sat down beside him. Placed one hand on the curve of his spine. He leaned into me. Slowly. Completely. The weight of him pressing into my ribs felt like a memory that had decided to stay. We didn't speak. Of course not. But in the stillness of that hallway, with the car seat behind us and the rest of the world ahead, I understood something I hadn't been able to name until then. Bear hadn't just remembered Eva. He'd remembered what it meant to love through the end of something and still stay. Later that week, we visited the gravesite. I hadn't taken Eva before. I didn't know what she'd understand. What she'd feel. But she asked. One morning at breakfast, she pointed to the photo of her mother. Then to Bear. Then out the window. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. So I packed a small blanket. 2 apples. And a folded flower Eva had made with her crayons. It was barely held together, just loops of paper and too much glue. But it was hers. And that was enough. The cemetery was quiet. Always is. The trees were bare, but the grass had started to brown gently instead of dying all at once. We found the marker easily. Her mother's name etched into stone that never felt cold enough to hold who she had been. Eva walked ahead of us. Unafraid. Bear followed, as he always did, steady, close, alert. She didn't kneel. She stood, held the paper flower in both hands, and laid it down. Then she sat cross-legged, facing the stone. Bear sat beside her. And I stayed back, hands buried in the sleeves of my coat, watching the two of them speak a language no one had taught them. One built not from words but from witness. After a while, Eva looked over her shoulder. She patted the grass. So I joined them. 3 bodies in the silence. 3 points of breath in the quiet between then and now. Eva leaned into my side. Her hand found Bear's fur. He didn't move. Just closed his eyes. And we stayed there. Not to mourn. But to remember. Not what we'd lost. What we'd found. That night, Eva fell asleep before dinner. Bear curled beside her crib, not quite inside the nursery, just across the doorway. As if holding the border between sleep and waking. I watched him from the hall. His eyes half closed, ears at rest, tail twitching gently once in a while. His breath was slow. Even. And for the first time, I realized he wasn't watching for danger. He was just breathing. Like she was. Like I was. And sometimes, that's the only proof you need that something is safe. Later, I checked the monitor one last time. Eva's small body curled on the mattress. The lamb tucked under her arm. Bear's figure just in frame, stretched long across the doorway. And a sound not loud, not sharp. A single exhale. Like the end of a song. I turned off the light. And whispered into the dark. She's home now. They found him in the middle of the highway, motionless. Guarding something that wasn't there anymore. The car seat lay on its side in the gravel, a broken cradle kissed by dust and blood. And next to it, the German shepherd stood, his eyes locked on the horizon, as if still waiting for something he couldn't name. As if he'd forgotten how to stop. This story begins in the wreckage. But it doesn't end there. This story will break you and then rebuild something you didn't know was missing. Like, share, and tell us where in the world are you watching from today? The wind that morning was still. No birds. No passing cars. Just the hush of silence that comes after something loud, a silence that feels like it's holding its breath. The first responder said he nearly missed the dog altogether. The SUV had spun into the shoulder grass, its side crumpled like a crushed can, a scatter of plastic, paper, and glass fanning out across the blacktop like fallen feathers. But the dog, he was still standing. A full-grown German shepherd, legs trembling under him, muzzle raw, dark with dried blood, but his eyes weren't wild. They were waiting. Right there beside the empty car seat. He didn't move when they shouted. Didn't growl. Didn't run. Just kept his head tilted ever so slightly, like he was listening for something beyond this place. They called animal control. Standard protocol, they said. But no one could bring themselves to touch him. Someone left a bottle of water near his feet. Someone else laid a blanket over the car seat, even though it was too late for that. They talked in low tones about how the baby had been airlifted out, how the mother didn't make it, how no one was sure who the dog belonged to. And still he stood guard. 4 hours. No leash. No command. Just that one act of silent loyalty, the kind that doesn't ask for reward. The kind that waits, even when there's nothing left to wait for. When the officers approached again at dusk, he didn't bare his teeth. But he did step in front of the car seat. One paw forward. A low, quiet growl, more grief than threat. The setting sun cut through the trees in fractured gold. You could see the dust rising from his coat, every inch of him trembling but rooted. The way old soldiers tremble when the guns stop firing. It was then that someone, a woman with a soft voice, noticed the tag beneath his fur. The collar worn smooth from age. One word engraved in dull metal, Bear. That was all he had left. A name. And a car seat too light to hold anything anymore. They say trauma leaves impressions not always on the skin, but in the way a body holds still long after the danger has passed. Bear didn't fight when they finally lifted the car seat. Didn't bark. Didn't lunge. Didn't even look up at the hands that reached for it. He just sat down. Like a weight had finally pulled his legs out from under him. Like the moment of surrender wasn't fear, but exhaustion. They didn't know what to do with him. Not at first. The shelter was overcrowded. The nearest emergency vet was closing early. And the tag with his name, Bear, etched into weathered brass led nowhere. No address. No microchip. Just a phone number that rang endlessly, until silence answered back. He rode in the back of a deputy's cruiser, his body slack but eyes wide open. Every time they hit a bump, his head would lift slightly. Just enough to glance at the empty car seat belted beside him. Then it would fall again. Like memory was heavier than pain. They didn't clean him right away. Didn't bathe him or tend the wounds behind his ears. The vet on call said the lacerations were shallow. That the blood wasn't all his. She didn't ask whose it might have been. She didn't need to. What lingered wasn't just dirt or debris. It was something older, the scent of smoke, of milk, of plastic melted in summer sun. Faint traces of something soft, a floral detergent in the folds of a blanket. A whisper of vanilla. Bear laid his head on the cement floor of the overnight kennel. Not a whimper. Not a sound. He just stared at the wall, like he knew that something important was on the other side of it. Something he couldn't reach. I didn't meet Bear until the third day. The shelter called me because I'd fostered seniors before. Broken ones. The dogs that don't bark anymore. The ones who flinch at loud shoes, who never quite rest unless a heartbeat's close by. I wasn't sure I could take another. My apartment was too small. My job too chaotic. And honestly, I wasn't all there either. After we lost Ellie, I'd stopped putting her toys away. Stopped opening the bedroom curtains. Some mornings I forgot to eat. Other mornings, I remembered but didn't want to. Still, I said yes. Because something in the staff's voice told me this wasn't just another intake. German Shepherd, they said. Won't eat. Won't sleep. But he won't leave the car seat either. What car seat? He brought it into the kennel with him. They paused. He drags it to the corner before he lies down. Every night. When I arrived, Bear was lying just like they said. Curled in a loose half-moon around a faded gray car seat. The fabric was torn. The straps frayed and bent at the clasp. But someone had tried to clean it gently. I could still smell soap, barely masking the rust and pine scent of dried blood and summer rain. I didn't speak right away. Didn't kneel, didn't reach. I just watched. He didn't raise his head but his eyes flicked toward me. Deep brown. Unblinking. Not wild but tired. Too tired to be afraid. I sat down on the floor, a few feet away. Waited. Time passed like water dripping from a faucet, slow, steady, without rush. Eventually, he shifted. Just slightly. Enough to rest his chin across the edge of the car seat. As if anchoring himself to the memory it carried. As if it were still carrying something back. And for a long time, neither of us moved. That first night, I brought him home. He didn't resist the leash, but he paused at every corner, nose twitching, searching for something in the air that wasn't there. Each stair in my building creaked under his weight, but he climbed them with the quiet dignity of a dog who's learned that the world doesn't give second chances, only echoes. He wouldn't eat. Not the chicken. Not the soft kibble. Not even the warmed rice. But he drank carefully, as if each lap from the bowl required permission from a memory I couldn't see. He lay down near my bookshelf and then, after a pause, rose again and went to the entryway. He curled beside the front door, like a sentry. Like something precious was inside, and he was the last wall between it and the rest of the world. Only there was nothing there. Just a worn rug, and a light that flickered above the door frame. Still, he stayed there all night. Even as the apartment cooled. Even as I drifted off, half awake, waiting for a bark that never came. By morning, the blanket was gone. I found it in the hallway. Dragged from the couch, one corner still damp with his breath. He'd brought it to the door. Folded it. And then curled around it like a mother guarding a cradle. No training could explain that. No command or instinct. Only love. Or loss. Or both. The vet visited that afternoon. Said he was healing well. No infection. No breaks. But something else caught her attention. A patch of fur above his ribs shorter than the rest, with faint white scarring beneath. Old stitches, long healed. Not from the crash. Much older. Looks like surgery, she said softly. Years ago. Maybe from being hit by a car. Her fingers paused over the spot. Whoever took care of him, they loved him. They spent money to save him. Bear didn't flinch beneath her touch. Didn't growl. Didn't pull away. But his eyes stayed fixed on the blanket in the doorway, like he was still guarding a secret the world wasn't ready to hear. That night, I watched him sleep. Watched the way his paws twitched, as if still running toward something. Or away. And in the dim yellow light of the hall, I saw the corner of the car seat, the one they let me keep, just in case it helped him adjust. He had pulled it close again. Not to sleep in. But to lean on. The way someone leans on a gravestone. The way someone says goodbye without ever saying the word. I didn't know then what had happened to the child. Didn't know the mother's name. Didn't know who Bear had once belonged to or if he still did. But I knew this much, he was waiting. And something inside me, the part that still whispered Ellie's name in empty rooms, recognized that kind of waiting. It doesn't look like hope. It looks like silence. Like breath held just 1 second too long. Like a door you refuse to close, because someone, somewhere, might still come through it. There are things dogs remember that people forget. Not just commands or scents, but the shape of things. The feel of a routine. The rhythm of a life. Bear didn't search rooms like a curious pet. He moved through my apartment as if he was trying to rebuild a map from fragments he carried in his body. He paused at mirrors. Avoided the kitchen doorframe. Touched his nose to the base of my old rocking chair like it held a memory just below the wood grain. It took me a while to understand what he was doing. He wasn't exploring. He was looking for someone. On the 4th day, he stood in the hallway long after I'd left the light off. I heard his claws shift across the floorboards, not pacing. Just adjusting. Balancing himself against something I couldn't see. He kept staring at the wall. Not growling. Not barking. Just staring. Like he expected a door to open there. I sat beside him. Pressed my back to the wall. Watched him lift his nose, sniff once, twice. Then lower it again, as if confirming something. Loss has a scent. I believe that now. I've lived in spaces where a child's absence thickens the air. Where toys remain untouched. Where silence replaces lullabies. Bear knew that scent. He carried it with him. A week passed before he ate more than a few bites. I'd started warming sweet potatoes with rice. Something about the smell seemed to soothe him. He still ignored most of it, but sometimes, at dusk, he'd take a single mouthful and walk to the car seat, laying down beside it like a ritual. That was what it became, I think, a ritual. Every night, he'd pull the old car seat across the floor. Position it beside the front door. Rest his paw on the side buckle. And then close his eyes. It never seemed like rest. More like a watch post. A vow he didn't know how to break. I started leaving the apartment door cracked open. Only by an inch or two, enough for the hallway light to spill in and touch the corner of the blanket he kept folded. Somehow, it felt wrong to close him off. He never tried to run. Never even left the entryway. But the way he watched that small strip of light, the way he held still when footsteps passed outside, told me he was waiting for someone specific. Someone small. Someone he loved more than food or comfort or sleep. Someone who hadn't come home yet. It was the smell of milk that finally broke me. 10 days after Bear arrived, I came home late from work, head pounding from too many overhead lights, the weight of things I didn't know how to fix. I'd stopped at the grocery store. Just a few basics. Eggs. Bread. Almond milk. When I walked through the door, the bag slipped from my hand. The milk carton cracked, spilling across the floor. And before I could move, Bear was there, frozen. Nose to the tiles. Eyes wide. The scent hit him like a memory. He whimpered a soft, hollow sound, as if something inside him had come loose. Then he looked at me. And in that moment, I swear to you, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking through me. Past me. Like I was standing in the place where someone else should have been. I sat down in the spilled milk. Didn't bother with the mess. Didn't speak. Just reached my hand out and placed it gently on the side of his neck. He didn't flinch. But he leaned into me. So gently, it almost wasn't a movement at all. I think it was the first time he let me touch him that way. Not just proximity but trust. And for a long while, we sat there in silence, surrounded by the scent of something lost and the echo of something still unfinished. I kept a journal after that. Not because I needed to remember, but because I needed to understand. Every night, I wrote down what Bear did. Where he lay. What he looked at. What time he barked, if he barked at all. Patterns began to emerge. He barked only at 3:08 a.m. Every night. One bark. Not frantic. Not scared. Just one. I began waking before it. Waiting for it. And every night, it came like a tolling bell in an empty town. I started to wonder. Was it the time of the crash? Was it the time she used to wake up for feedings? Was it something I couldn't name? One evening, while sorting through the last box from Ellie's old nursery, I found an old sound machine. It still worked. I turned it on without thinking. Rainfall. White noise. Ocean waves. Then a setting I'd forgotten, heartbeat. A soft, rhythmic thumping like a mother's chest against a newborn's ear. When Bear heard it, his head shot up. He crossed the room slowly. Stood beside the machine. Then lay down. Pressed his body against the low hum of that sound, and finally for the first time slept without watching the door. I knew then. He hadn't been protecting the car seat. Not exactly. He'd been listening for something. A rhythm. A heartbeat. He'd been keeping time in the dark for someone who couldn't tell it anymore. And now that he'd found it again, even faintly, he could rest, just a little. A few days later, the shelter called. They had news. But they didn't say it over the phone. Only, "You'll want to come in." And so I did. Bear rode in the back of the car. He didn't sit, he stood the whole way. Head tilted toward the window, nose twitching against the glass. As if the wind carried a message he almost remembered. The shelter staff didn't crowd us. They didn't speak much. Just handed me a file. Photographs. A burned registration tag. A list of personal effects recovered from the crash. And something else. A journal. Spiral bound. Bent at the corner. Faint doodles in the margins. And inside, a name written in blocky, careful letters. Bear's boy. I didn't open it right away. My hands were shaking too much. But Bear, he leaned in. Nose pressed to the edge of the paper. And let out the smallest sound I'd ever heard from him, a sigh that sounded like grief and relief, braided into one breath. It wasn't a full answer. But it was a piece. A name. A scent. A heartbeat on paper. A path toward something we hadn't reached yet. That night, Bear curled closer to the car seat than ever before. And when I turned out the lights, he didn't lift his head. Not once. He just breathed. Slow. Steady. As if something inside him had finally found enough stillness to begin healing. And in the quiet that followed, I realized something I hadn't before: he wasn't waiting alone anymore. And maybe neither was I. There are certain kinds of quiet that don't feel empty. Not absence but presence, wrapped in stillness too sacred to disturb. That's what my apartment became. Not silent in the hollow way, not like after Ellie. But full of breath. Of pause. Of Bear's slow footsteps in the night and the soft scratch of his claws as he circled a memory no one else could see. I began to wonder if I was circling too. The journal from the shelter sat untouched for 2 days. I kept it on the side table by the window, its cover faded from sun, its spine cracked and bowed from use. I told myself I was giving Bear time. But if I'm honest, it was me who wasn't ready. There's a kind of grief that feels like trespassing, as if reading someone's story without their permission might unravel something fragile. But on the third night, when the rain began slow, steady, a rhythm like breath against the glass, Bear walked to the journal. He didn't nudge it. Didn't bark or whine. He just sat. And stared. And I understood. So I opened it. The entries were short. Simple. Childlike, but steady, someone young, but watchful. Each page started the same way: Bear was good today. And then a line or two, little windows into a life. He let me read to him during quiet time. He knew when I was scared and late on my feet. Mom says he understands things better than people do. There were no dates, but I didn't need them. The ink changed as the pages turned from blue pen to pencil to crayon. But the voice never did. Calm. Observant. Gentle. Whoever this child was, they had loved Bear completely. Not like a pet, like a partner. A protector. One page stopped me. Tucked in the middle, not quite halfway through. Written in uneven pencil, with letters leaning into each other like they were holding on: he stayed beside the car seat all night again. I think he misses her. Her. Not Mom. Someone else. I felt my chest tighten. Bear shifted, pressing his body against my legs. Not seeking comfort, offering it. It was always like that with him. He gave first. Even when he was the one breaking. That week, I rearranged the apartment. Moved furniture gently. Cleared a spot near the window where Bear liked to sit. Hung up a second leash by the door, even though I didn't know why. I found myself buying soft things again: blankets, a second dog bed. Not because Bear needed it, he still refused to sleep on anything but the floor near the car seat, but because something in me had begun to make room. Not for a person. Not even for a dog. For the idea that life might still have something left to offer beyond the ache. Then came the morning of the knock. It was barely audible. 3 soft taps. Not urgent. Not expected. I was still in my robe. Coffee halfway poured. Bear already alert, standing at the door, not barking. Just listening. I opened it slowly. And there in the hallway stood a woman I didn't recognize. Thin. Worn. Eyes sunken not from age, but from too many nights spent waiting for an answer that never came. She was holding something in her arms wrapped in a blue quilt, stitched at the corners with tiny yellow ducks. And beneath it a child. She didn't speak at first. Just looked down at Bear. Then up at me. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "I'm not here to take him," she whispered. I needed to see if it was true. I didn't know what to say. Didn't know what true meant. Didn't know who she was, or how she found us. But Bear stepped forward. Not fast. Not eager. Just present. He moved with the same reverence he had when he approached the car seat, when he touched the blanket after the heartbeat sound. The child in her arms stirred. Just a little. A soft, sleepy noise, not a cry. And Bear he froze. Not out of fear. Not confusion. Recognition. The woman knelt. Gently lowered the child onto the floor, still swaddled, blinking up at the ceiling light. And Bear he lowered himself until his nose just barely brushed the edge of the quilt. He didn't sniff. He breathed. Long, slow inhales as if confirming what he already knew. And then he lay down beside the child. Pressed his body close, but not too close. Protective. Careful. And the baby, barely old enough to track movement, turned toward him. Eyes half-lidded. Fingers uncurling just enough to touch the fur at his side. I couldn't speak. The woman stood up slowly, watching Bear the entire time. "I'm her aunt," she said, voice thick now. "My sister." She didn't Later that week, I took them both to the park. The same one I used to walk through with Ellie on the days when I couldn't bear to go home. It was early. Clouds hung low. The grass still damp from the night before. Eva held my hand loosely. Bear walked at her side. No leash. No need. We found a quiet spot near the willow trees. Eva sat in the shade. Bear beside her. A group of children passed nearby, loud and laughing. A soccer ball rolled toward us. Eva flinched. Just slightly. Bear rose, positioned himself between her and the ball. The boy who chased it froze, eyes wide. I stepped forward, about to speak. But Eva reached out, placed her hand on Bear's side. And whispered, clear and steady, "It's okay." It was only the second word I had heard her say. And Bear he turned back toward her. Ears relaxing. Posture easing. The boy retrieved his ball, and Eva smiled. Not at him. At Bear. And in that smile was something I hadn't seen before. Not memory. Hope. That evening, as I wrote in the journal, the one I had begun, not for Bear, but for myself, I noticed something I hadn't before. The quiet no longer felt like waiting. It felt like presence. Like the kind of silence that comes when you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Bear curled at the foot of the couch. Eva asleep against my shoulder. The lamb tucked between them like a stitched-together promise. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that maybe we weren't just healing. Maybe we were becoming something new. There are days that pass so quietly, you only notice them in the way the light moves. Not in words. Not in events. But in the sound of socks against hardwood, the whisper of fur against a child's quilt, the hush of a home that's learning how to breathe again. That's how the days unfolded. Gentle. Predictable. Bear beside Eva. Eva beside Bear. And somewhere in the background, I found myself adjusting without realizing it. There was a rhythm now. Not perfect. Not polished. But real. And sometimes real is enough. I didn't expect the letter. It came on a Tuesday. Thin envelope. State seal in the corner. The kind of paper that means decisions are being made without you. I opened it at the kitchen counter. The kettle hissed in the background, tea steeping in silence. Inside, one sheet, notice of scheduled custody review hearing. Regarding minor, Eva Monroe. A date. 2 weeks away. My name not listed. Just, temporary care provider. Nothing final. Not yet. But the phrasing held weight. It always does, when people far away from you get to decide what home looks like. I didn't tell Eva. She was too young. Too quiet. Too recently mended to understand what it meant to be moved again. And Bear, he didn't need to hear words to understand. He knew something had shifted. That night, he didn't sleep in the nursery. He slept at the front door again. Nose to the crack beneath the threshold. Ears tilted toward sounds I couldn't hear. Waiting. 2 days later, the knock came. Not the soft kind, like the ant before. This one was sharper. Measured. I opened the door slowly. A man in a blazer stood on the threshold. Not young. Not old. Clipboard in one hand, a folder in the other. "I'm with the department," he said. He didn't offer a smile. I stepped aside to let him in. Bear was already standing between the couch and Eva. Not aggressive, just present. The man paused, eyes on the dog. "Is he protective?" he asked. I answered carefully. "He's consistent." That seemed to register. He nodded once, then moved on. The interview lasted just under 40 minutes. He asked questions like he was checking boxes. Does she have her own bed? Has she been to her follow-ups? Has she bonded with any caregivers? I answered each one quietly. Bear stayed in the hallway the whole time, eyes tracking the stranger like a second shadow. When Eva came into the room, she moved to Bear first, placed one hand on his shoulder. Not out of fear. Out of certainty. This was her answer, whether the clipboard recorded it or not. After the man left, I sat on the floor beside Bear. Eva climbed into my lap. Neither of us said anything. But Bear pressed his weight against us just slightly more than usual. Like he was anchoring us to something bigger than questions and custody orders. That night, I watched them sleep again. The monitor blinked faintly in my room. A quiet, soft pulse. Eva was curled into Bear's side. Her hand rested on his ribcage, rising and falling with each breath. And in the corner of the screen, tucked near the baseboard where Eva had once left it, the photograph. The one of Bear, the young woman, and baby Eva. Still there. Still upright. Still untouched. It was her mother, of course. I'd never said it aloud. Never needed to. It was in the way Bear looked at that image, like it was the last sentence of a story he couldn't stop reading. The next morning, I opened the back window just wide enough to let in the breeze. It was early. The world outside was still waking. Eva sat in her usual spot, knees to her chest, blanket pulled over her lap. Bear beside her, of course. But something had changed. She wasn't humming. She was listening. The wind rustled through the trees, and her head tilted just slightly. As if someone had called her name without using sound. Bear noticed it too. He lifted his nose. Inhaled deeply. Then looked at her. Not for direction. For affirmation. They stayed like that until the breeze passed. Later that day, the social worker called again. This time, her voice sounded tighter. "We've had interest," she said carefully. "From extended family. On the father's side." The words barely reached me. Interest. Like Eva was a property being listed. Like her grief was a file to be reviewed. I swallowed my questions. "Have they met her?" I asked. A pause. No, do they know about Bear? Another pause. We mentioned the dog. They didn't seem concerned. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. Do they know he's not just a pet? She didn't answer that. Only said, I'll keep you updated. That night, Bear didn't eat. He lay near the bedroom window, ears twitching, eyes tracking headlights that passed on the street below. Eva brought him the lamb. Laid it beside his nose. Still, he didn't move. Not in refusal but in vigilance. He was bracing. Not for threat. For loss. He knew what it looked like when the world tried to take away the thing you loved most. 3 days before the hearing, I took them back to the park. Same path. Same willow trees. But the air felt thinner somehow. The wind sharper. Eva held my hand tighter than usual. Bear walked a step closer than normal. We sat on the same bench. Watched the same sun set behind the same row of houses. But something unspoken had joined us. The knowledge that time had started moving again. And it wasn't moving in our favor. On the way home, we passed a family unloading groceries. 2 parents. A little boy. The boy stared at Bear, wide-eyed. Can I pet your dog? He asked. I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, Eva stepped forward. She didn't speak. Didn't smile. She just placed her hand on Bear's head and shook it gently no. The boy nodded. Didn't press. And Eva she turned back to Bear, rested her forehead against his fur. And whispered just loud enough for me to hear, mine. That night, Bear finally ate. Slowly. Deliberately. Each bite seemed to say, I'm still here. I'm still choosing this. And when Eva fell asleep beside him, he didn't curl around her like before. This time, he lay on his back. Chest exposed. Throat vulnerable. The most fragile kind of trust a dog can offer. Not just devotion. Surrender. And still, the hearing loomed. 2 days away. A hallway I would have to walk down. A chair I would have to sit in. A decision I wouldn't get to make. I wanted to ask the universe for something. A sign. A shift. A stay. But all I had was this, the child who had once said one word to claim her place in the world. And the dog who had followed her into that word as if it were holy ground. Some endings don't sound like doors slamming shut. They sound like footsteps in a hallway, papers shuffled across a table, a pen clicking once, then again, as someone you've never met decides the direction of someone you love. The morning of the hearing came quietly. No alarms. No commotion. Just soft light pooling on the nursery floor, and Bear's breath rising and falling in slow rhythm beside Eva's sleeping form. She didn't know what day it was. But Bear always knew. He stood earlier than usual. Didn't eat. Didn't stretch. He just moved to the front door and sat down facing it, his body rigid, alert, but his eyes steady. Waiting. Not out of fear. But preparation. I dressed Eva gently. She let me. There was something in her posture that morning, not resistance, but awareness. She didn't speak. But she kept glancing at Bear like she knew he was about to follow her into a place he couldn't protect her from. He walked beside us to the car, then climbed in before I asked. He pressed his nose to the window the entire drive. Watching. Breathing. Remembering. The courthouse was small. An old building, beige brick, sagging steps. Inside, the air smelled like paper and carpet glue and nervous sweat. They checked my ID. Gave Eva a sticker with her name on it. She peeled it off immediately. And when the clerk told me Bear had to wait outside, I didn't argue. I simply nodded, led him back through the doors, and tied his leash to the tree beside the entrance. I knelt down, eye level. You don't have to guard today, I whispered. But he just looked past me toward the doors. Toward Eva. And lay down on the concrete. Not defeated. Present. As always. Inside, the room was too bright. Fluorescent lights hummed above us, and the judge, a tall man with a tired face, spoke gently but formally. Legal guardianship. Biological ties. Temporary placement. Every phrase another inch of distance between love and law. The paternal relatives sat across the aisle. I hadn't seen them before. A man in a starched collar. A woman with a folder full of photos. They looked kind, in the way people often do when they mean well but arrive too late. They spoke when asked. Said they were willing to step in. Said they'd honor her memory. Said they had a room prepared. They didn't mention Eva's name. Or Bear's. When they asked me to speak, I stood slowly. My voice was steady. I surprised myself with that. I'm not here to compete, I said. I know what biology means on paper. But I also know what love looks like when it has no reason left to stay and stays anyway. The judge tilted his head slightly. I continued. Eva's already chosen her home. Not through words, not many, anyway, but through trust. And Bear doesn't leave her side. Not because anyone told him to. Because he remembers who she is. Because he knows. I paused. And then added, softer, they found him next to her car seat. He wouldn't leave it. He remembered when no one else did. Silence followed. No dramatic reactions. No gasps. Just the quiet shifting of papers. A pen scribbling something I couldn't see. The judge thanked me. Said he would review all testimonies carefully. Said we'd hear back soon. That was all. We walked out of that courtroom with nothing more than we had carried in a name tag in my pocket, a child in my arms, and a dog waiting beneath a tree like he'd known all along that no verdict would come quickly. Bear rose the moment he saw her. He didn't jump. Didn't bark. Just stood. Tail low. Posture calm. And when Eva reached him, when her hand touched the side of his neck, he exhaled. Not relief. Just confirmation. The way someone exhales when they realize they were right to keep waiting. The drive home was silent. Eva leaned against Bear in the back seat, her fingers tangled in the soft ruff behind his ears. Bear didn't move. Didn't blink. The entire ride, he faced forward. As if watching the road himself. That night, none of us slept well. I lay awake listening to the soft sounds from the nursery monitor. A shift in blankets. A small sigh. And every so often, Bear's breath deep, steady, a soft rasp in the dark. At 3:08 a.m., I heard a single bark. Just one. Then silence. The kind that wraps itself around you like a hand on your shoulder. Not comforting. Steadying. In the morning, Eva didn't come out of the nursery right away. I peeked in, ready to call her name. But she was already standing. Still in her pajamas. One hand resting on Bear's side, the other holding the photograph again. This time, she brought it to me. Held it up with both hands. No words. Just eyes wide and knowing. And then she pointed to her mother. Then to herself. Then to Bear. 3 points. 3 lives. 1 line. I knelt down, eye level with her. And in the quiet between us, I whispered, she knew. And now you do too. Eva didn't nod. Didn't smile. She simply turned and walked back to Bear. That afternoon, the call came. The hearing had concluded. The judge had made his ruling. They wanted a follow-up meeting within the week. I asked if a decision had been made. The woman on the line was quiet a moment, then said, "It's still complicated." Then she added, "But the judge requested a home visit before final placement. Said he wanted to see things for himself." That surprised me. Judges don't often visit. But this one, apparently, had heard enough in the stillness of that courtroom to want to witness it in motion. 3 days later, he came. No blazer. No robe. Just a windbreaker and quiet shoes. He didn't knock loudly. Didn't make an announcement. When I opened the door, he simply nodded and asked, "May I come in?" I stepped aside. He looked around slowly. At the living room. At the scattered toys. At the framed ultrasound that still hung, quietly, above the kitchen calendar. Then he looked at Bear. And Eva. They were in the hallway. She was feeding him a piece of banana, her hand open, unafraid. Bear took it slowly. Chewed. Waited for the next. The judge watched them silently. Then asked, barely above a whisper, "Does he always stay that close?" I nodded. "He has from the beginning." Another pause. "And she?" "She's never once cried when she's with him." He turned to me then. "You know," he said, "when they found that dog, some officers thought he was dangerous." I nodded. "I know." "And now?" I smiled, just a little. "Now he's family." He didn't stay much longer. Didn't ask for documents or forms. Just turned at the door and said, "Some bonds can't be written into files. But they're real all the same." He looked toward Eva and Bear one last time. "I'll be in touch." Then he left. That evening, Bear returned to the nursery before Eva did. He lay down in his usual spot, the lamb tucked beside him, his eyes closed even before the lights dimmed. Eva joined him minutes later. No ceremony. She simply slid beneath the blanket, her back to his chest. And together, they breathed. Not waiting. Not bracing. Just being. The decision hadn't come yet. But something else had. A stillness. Not the kind that waits for endings. The kind that makes room for a different kind of beginning. Some decisions don't come in a burst. They come like rain on dry earth, not loud, not sudden, but slow, steady until one day, everything is quietly changed. It had been 5 days since the judge's visit. No letters. No calls. Just that liminal waiting space, where clocks tick louder and the world feels paused, as if it's holding its breath. In that silence, nothing changed visibly, but we all knew something was shifting. Bear spent more time near the door again. Not guarding. Just waiting, like he was listening for footsteps he hadn't heard in a long time. Eva, too, grew quieter. She didn't hum. She didn't speak. But she began carrying the photograph from room to room, carefully, always with both hands. And when she set it down, she placed it between herself and Bear. Like a bridge. Like a question waiting to be answered. On the 6th day, we received another letter. This one didn't have the cool official seal. It was hand-addressed. The return name was unfamiliar, but I recognized the last name instantly: Monroe. The father's side. I opened it at the kitchen table while Eva napped, Bear curled at her feet. The note was brief. Respectful. But clear. "We've been following the process closely. We weren't ready then. But we are now. We'd like to meet her. And if she's willing, we'd like to bring her home. No malice. No arrogance. Just a request." A door creaking open. I stared at that letter for a long time. Not angry. Just still. They hadn't seen her sleep against Bear's side. They hadn't heard her whisper, "mine," when strangers looked too long. They hadn't stood in the hallway at 3:08 a.m. and heard the single bark that marked a memory too old for her to name but too deep to forget. But they were blood. They were family. And the law knows how to count names. It does not always know how to measure silence. That night, I found Bear in the window again. The same window he'd looked through on the night the milk spilled. Only now, he wasn't standing. He was sitting. Not tense. Not braced. But aware. I sat beside him. Didn't speak. After a long while, his ears twitched. A sound only he could hear. Then he turned and rested his chin on my knee. Just for a moment. And I understood. He wasn't asking permission. He was preparing to say goodbye. The next morning, I called the social worker. I asked if Eva had to go legally, yet. She paused. "There's no ruling yet," she said. "Would you allow a meeting?" I hesitated. Then, yes. But only here. Only where she feels safe. Another pause. "I'll arrange it." They came 3 days later. A couple in their early 30s. Polite. Visibly nervous. The man carried a paper bag with toys inside. The woman brought a binder of printed photos. They knocked softly. Eva was already in the hallway when I opened the door. Bear beside her. Still. Watching. I let them in. They removed their shoes. Sat slowly on the edge of the couch, their knees touching, hands folded tightly in their laps. The woman smiled first. Not wide. Not eager. Soft. "We're so happy to meet you, Eva." She didn't respond. But her eyes never left Bear. The man spoke next. "You might not remember us, but we remember you." He opened a folder. Pulled out a picture. A hospital room. A bassinet. Eva wrapped tightly in a pink blanket. The woman beside her, smiling through tears. "We came the day you were born," he said. "We brought flowers." Eva reached for the photo. Held it. Examined it. Then set it gently on the rug. Beside Bear's paw. He didn't move. But his breath slowed. The meeting lasted just under an hour. They didn't push. Didn't speak much. They asked to see the nursery. I agreed. When they stepped into the room, the man's hand covered his mouth. The woman traced the rocking chair with her fingers. "She used to sing here," she whispered. She said Eva would kick more when she rocked. I didn't interrupt. Some grief belongs to more than one person. Some rooms echo more than one story. Before they left, they asked if they could come again. Eva looked up at me then. Her eyes didn't plead. They asked. Not, "Can they?" but, "Do I have to?" I knelt beside her. "You don't have to do anything yet," I said softly. "Not until you're ready." Then I looked at the woman. "She needs time." The woman nodded, tears caught behind her lashes. "We'll wait." That night, Eva didn't sleep in the nursery. She dragged her blanket to the living room and curled up in the space between the couch and the wall. Bear followed. Laid himself along her side like a second layer. Her eyes dropped to the floor. The baby, her name is Eva, was in the hospital for a while. It was a mess. Paperwork. Guardianship. No one knew where the dog went. They told me he probably didn't survive. She swallowed hard. But then someone from the shelter called. Said a man took him home. Said he was different. She looked at me. Was he always like this? I didn't know how to answer. So I said the only thing that felt true. He never forgot her. We didn't speak much after that. She didn't stay long. She just sat for a few minutes, watching Bear curl around the baby like a fortress of breath and warmth. "I can't keep him," she said quietly. "Where I'm living they don't allow it. And Eva, she doesn't sleep unless something's pressing against her." Her voice broke. She used to curl into the side of the car seat. When they were home, Bear would sit beside it for hours. I nodded. I already knew. When she left the quilt behind. And the child. I don't know what made her trust me. Maybe it was Bear. Maybe it was the way Eva didn't cry when she left. Maybe it was the quiet in the apartment that felt more like safety than silence. All I knew was this: that night, Bear did not move to the door. He stayed curled beside Eva the entire time she slept. And when I passed by in the early hours of the morning, I saw something I hadn't seen since the day he arrived. His eyes closed. Completely. Peacefully. As if the thing he had waited for had finally returned. There are bonds that don't need building. They remember themselves. Like a river finding its old path, like hands folding into a shape they already knew. That's what it was like with Bear and Eva. They didn't meet. They remembered. That first full day, I didn't try to interfere. I didn't speak loudly. Didn't pick her up unless I had to. Didn't call Bear away, even when she began to explore slowly, cautiously, with that gentle wobble toddlers have when their bodies are still learning the weight of gravity. She had this way of reaching forward with her entire self, as if trusting the world to catch her if she tipped too far. And Bear always did. He stayed a few feet away at first. Watching. Waiting. Each shift of her legs, each uncertain turn of her head he followed with a gaze that didn't blink. Not once. When she stumbled, his body moved before she hit the floor. Not a bark. Not a panic. Just a presence there, beneath her elbow, catching her gently with the side of his ribs. She smiled once. Barely. It wasn't joy. It wasn't playfulness. It was recognition. Like she had just remembered a face from a dream. And Bear, his tail thumped. Once. Softly. The first sound of life he'd made in days. I watched from the kitchen. Hands still resting on the mug I hadn't lifted. Coffee cold. Eyes not daring to blink. There was no performance in either of them. No moment of bonding that begged to be noticed. It was as if they'd picked up a conversation that had been paused, not ended. Eva was quiet. Almost unnaturally so. No babbling, no outbursts. Her voice existed only in the hum of her breath and the scrape of her blanket as she dragged it from room to room. The pediatrician called it delayed verbal recovery. Said it wasn't uncommon after trauma. Said she might speak again in time. But something in me knew that words weren't what she needed now. Not yet. She had Bear. And Bear spoke the only language she trusted. That afternoon, it rained. Not heavy, just enough to gloss the windows and make the light in the apartment feel softer, as if the world outside had been muffled on purpose. Eva stood at the sliding glass door for nearly an hour. One hand against the pane. Forehead pressed to the glass. Bear sat beside her. His fur just brushing her shoulder, his body angled toward the outside. I watched the two of them, this tiny human and the dog who'd once guarded an empty car seat like it still carried life. And I realized, he wasn't guarding anymore. He was following. She was leading him now. Back into the light. She didn't speak that day. Or the next. But she did something else. She began to bring him things. Small things. A single sock, dropped near his paws. A page from a magazine, rolled up like a scroll. A plush toy, not hers, not Ellie's, but one I'd found in the back of a closet and set on the shelf without thinking. Each time, she'd place it beside him. Gently. No fanfare. And Bear would do the same thing every time. He would look at the object. Then at her. Then he'd rest his chin beside it, as if saying, "This matters to you, so it matters to me." And each time, Eva would nod. Just once. Like they had reached an agreement. Like the item had been blessed. By the end of the week, a small pile had formed beside Bear's bed. A tattered sock. A plush rabbit with a chewed ear. A ribbon blue, crinkled, pulled from the edge of the quilt. And in the center of it all, a photograph. I didn't know where she'd found it. It wasn't mine. It wasn't from the shelter. It had simply appeared one morning, tucked beneath Bear's paw as he lay asleep. It showed a young woman smiling, wind-blown, and the unmistakable form of Bear, years younger, sitting proudly beside her. In the woman's arms, a swaddled baby. Eyes shut. Mouth mid-cry. Eva. I didn't ask how she found it. Didn't search for the box it came from. Didn't try to place its origin. Some things you just let be. She had chosen to give it to Bear. And Bear had chosen to hold it. That was enough. Later that evening, I was folding laundry while Eva napped against Bear's side. Her head rose and fell with his breath. Every so often, she'd twitch a dream, or maybe a memory. And Bear would lift his head just enough to nuzzle her crown before settling again. That's when I noticed something. Beneath the blue quilt she always clung to, tucked deep into one corner a day. Not a price tag, a label. Handwritten. Faded from too many washes. But the words were still legible. For Eva. From Mama. Keep this with you, always. And just beside it a paw print. Stamped in brown ink. Not part of the fabric design. Something added later, deliberate. A perfect impression. Large. Too large for a toy. It was Bear's. That night, I couldn't sleep. The air felt heavy, thick with things unsaid. I moved to the living room. Watched the two of them from the hallway. Bear's head lay across Eva's lap now. Her tiny fingers curled loosely in his fur, like she was holding onto an anchor in a sea too deep for speech. I sat on the floor nearby, knees to my chest, heart too full for sleep. And I whispered, to no one in particular, "She's leading him home." The words fell like a prayer. And I think, in some quiet way, they were. In the early hours before dawn, Eva stirred. She sat up suddenly. Eyes wide, but not afraid. She looked around, as if listening for something just out of reach. And Bear, he rose with her. No noise. No alarm. Just presence. Eva stood, bare feet against the cool floor. She reached for her quilt, then stopped. Turned instead to Bear, placed a hand on his back, and took one small, wobbly step forward. Bear followed. Another step. And another. She was walking toward the hallway. Toward Ellie's old room. I followed in silence. The room had remained untouched. I hadn't been ready. Maybe I never would be. But Eva didn't hesitate. She reached for the door. Pushed it open with effort. Walked in. And stopped. Bear stood behind her, still. Watching. She moved to the center of the room where the rocking chair sat. The one Bear had sniffed, weeks ago. Eva touched it. Just once. Then looked up at me. And whispered the first word she had spoken since arriving, home. Home. It was one word. One breath, drawn from somewhere deep in Eva's tiny chest, but it landed like the final line of a hymn. Soft. Holy. Irrevocable. She didn't repeat it. Didn't look at me for approval. She simply sat in the middle of the room on the bare rug, knees tucked, the quilt in her lap like a relic she'd carried across miles. Bear moved toward her. Quiet as wind. He didn't sit this time. He lay down fully beside her, not guarding. Resting. I didn't clean the nursery after that. I didn't change the sheets or pack the toys. I didn't vacuum the dust from the corners or fold away the tiny clothes. I let it be. Eva had made her decision. This was her space now. Not because she claimed it but because she remembered it. And Bear, he accepted that. As if he'd been waiting all this time for her to open the door. Over the next few days, their rhythm changed. Eva would rise just after dawn. Always before me. Always barefoot. She never made noise, just appeared beside Bear, tugging softly at his ear or resting her hand between his shoulder blades until he rose beside her. Then they'd begin their patrol. Room to room. Always in the same order. Living room. Hallway. Kitchen. Front door. And last the nursery. Bear never led. Eva walked one step ahead, her pace uneven but determined. And he followed, never more than a body length behind. Sometimes she'd pause, turn back as if checking to make sure he hadn't drifted. He never had. One morning, I followed them. Stayed a few feet back. Didn't speak. Just watched. When Eva reached the living room, she stopped at the window and pressed her hand to the glass. Bear did the same, nose to the pane, breath fogging the cold surface. The light was still pale, morning soft. The kind that spills sideways through blinds and makes everything look washed in memory. They stood there a long time. Silent. Together. And I realized she wasn't just looking out. She was remembering how the world had once looked from inside a moving car. How it had felt to be still in the back seat with Bear beside her and someone singing in the front. Someone who wasn't here anymore. Later that day, I brought out the baby monitor. I hadn't touched it in months. Not since Ellie. The backlight still worked. The faint hum of static filled the speaker when I turned it on. I placed the receiver in my room, and the camera in the corner of the nursery. I didn't expect anything. Just wanted to know she was safe when the world went dark. That night, I checked the monitor every hour. But I didn't need to. Bear didn't move. Eva slept with her hand curled in his fur, her body shaped to his side. And Bear, his eyes stayed closed, his chest rising in steady rhythm that matched hers. It was the first time I'd seen him sleep deeply. Not just lie still. Sleep. The next morning, the vet came by for a check-in. Bear sat calmly during the exam, his eyes occasionally flicking to the nursery door. "He's different," she said. Her hands moved gently over his spine. "He used to tense when I touched him here." She pressed against the healed scars on his side. "Now he lets me." I nodded. She looked at me, voice softer. "And you? How are you doing?" I wasn't sure what she meant. But then she added, "It's not just him who's healing." That afternoon, Eva fell asleep in the hallway. No pillow. No blanket. Just curled like a comma between the bathroom and the kitchen. I bent to lift her, but Bear beat me to it. He didn't nudge her. Didn't bark or paw. He just lay down beside her and pressed his back into hers until she sighed a deep, complete exhale and settled again. I sat down beside them and let my back rest against the wall. We stayed like that for an hour. The hallway smelled like dust and shampoo and soft fur. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight leave my chest, not all of it, but enough to breathe differently. Enough to start. The next time the shelter called, I let it ring 3 times before answering. They just wanted an update. Said Bear's original file had been marked as closed. Unclaimed. But a new file had been opened for Eva. A social worker had noted her location. Her guardianship. Her emergency contact. They asked if I wanted to be listed. My voice cracked when I said yes. And when they asked about Bear, I told them he was no longer available. He had already chosen. Later that week, Eva began to hum. No songs. No melody I recognized. Just small sounds, half-lulled vibrations in the back of her throat when she played with the corner of her quilt or rubbed her fingers together. Bear would lift his head when she did it. As if the sound stirred something familiar. A lullaby without words. A memory without edges. He always stayed close when she hummed. Usually pressing his side against hers, matching her rhythm with his breath. Sometimes, she would stop mid-hum and look at him. Not to check if he was there but to remind herself that he always would be. The mailman knocked one morning. A package soft wrapped in brown paper. No return address. Inside, a small stuffed animal. A lamb, worn at the seams. And a note, handwritten in tight, uneven lines. I found this in the back seat. Thought she might want it. He wouldn't let us take it at first. He kept it under his chest the whole time. Please take care of them. M. There was no explanation. No name. But Bear pressed his nose to the lamb the second I unwrapped it. Then he nudged it toward Eva. She took it with both hands. No hesitation. Cradled it to her chest. Then, without a sound, she walked to Bear, placed the lamb between them, and curled up against his side. That night, as they slept, I stood in the nursery doorway. The moonlight slanted across the floor, cutting a pale line between crib and rocker, wall and window. Bear's fur shimmered faintly in it. Eva's fingers rested in the soft curve behind his front leg. And the lamb was tucked neatly between them. I wanted to speak. To say something aloud into that sacred silence. But I didn't. Some silences are meant to hold you. Not be broken. And so I simply turned off the light. And whispered, not to them, but to the part of myself I thought I had buried, we're still here. You never realize how loud the world is until you've lived in silence. Not the kind that comes from emptiness but the kind that comes from reverence. The kind Bear and Eva carried like breath and bone. Our apartment had become a pocket of stillness. A soft corner untouched by the noise beyond its walls. But time, as it always does, found its way in. Not with sirens. Not with headlines. With letters. Calls. Knocks at the door that lingered just a little longer than before. It began with Eva's checkup. Routine. The pediatrician's office was cold, its walls painted with cartoon murals meant to soothe children who didn't yet know what they had lost. Eva didn't cry. She didn't cling. She only looked toward the door every time it opened, expecting, perhaps, for Bear to walk through and sit beside her feet. I'd left him in the car, per policy. He stayed curled in the passenger seat, watching the building's entrance with the same expression he had worn the day I first met him, alert, patient, holding something unspoken in his stillness. The doctor asked me questions. Did she sleep through the night? Did she eat well? Did she speak more than one word? No. Sometimes. Not yet. He wrote things down. Circled terms in his chart. Then he paused. Has she formed any attachments? He asked. I opened my mouth, and then closed it. How could I explain? That her anchor had 4 legs and a history stitched into the folds of a quilt? That her language had taken root in the shadow of a shepherd's chest, not in any preschool primer? So I said, yes. 1. That was enough. He looked up from his notes, eyes softening. Sometimes 1 is all it takes. Outside, Bear stirred when we returned. The moment Eva came into view, his posture changed. Tail low but wagging. Ears tilting forward. That soft huff of breath he always gave when her scent reached him first. Eva climbed into the car without hesitation. Bear licked the back of her hand. No words. Just connection. One thread, pulled tighter. Over the next week, Bear changed. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. But noticeably. His gait lightened. The stiffness in his shoulders began to ease. He slept deeper. A full stretch now, belly up, legs kicked to the side like a dog who had nothing left to guard against. And he started to follow Eva not just during the day, but in her rhythms. When she sat he sat. When she turned her face to the wind he followed it too. When she pressed her forehead to the window at dusk he mirrored her posture, nose against the glass, watching the light dim in tandem with her breath. I didn't teach him this. No one did. It was a language written long before they arrived here. They were only remembering it now. One morning, Eva didn't wake when she usually did. The sun had fully risen. The apartment was bright, too bright. She was still curled in the nursery, quilt drawn to her chin, lamb tucked under her arm. I stood in the doorway, unsure. Listening. Bear was already there. But instead of curling beside her, he stood watch at the foot of the bed. Still. Alert. Breathing slow. I stepped closer. Then paused. Her eyes were open. Not wide. Just open enough to see the ceiling above her, to take in the softness of morning without being seen. And Bear he didn't move. He was waiting for her to speak first. She didn't. She only reached toward him. Fingers unfurling in that half-sleep way toddlers do when they know something is near, but haven't yet remembered what. Bear lowered his head until his nose met her palm. And only then did she rise. That same day, I got a call from the social worker. A new voice, this time younger, more formal. She wanted an in-home visit. Just to check in, she said. Nothing serious. They never say it's serious. I said yes, of course. Because I had nothing to hide. Because Eva was safe, fed, held. Because Bear had made sure of it. The visit came 2 days later. She wore shoes that clicked against the hardwood. Carried a leather bag and a clipboard. Smelled like soap and something metallic. Eva didn't approach her. She watched from the doorway, one hand resting on Bear's back. The woman asked questions. Looked around. Took notes. She didn't smile much. But she paused when she saw the nursery. What made you reopen the room? She asked, her pen hovering. I didn't answer right away. She turned to look at me. I could have explained the night Eva spoke. The way she had walked to the chair. The way Bear had followed her like a shadow made of breath and memory. Instead, I just said, she knew it was hers. That seemed to be enough. She nodded. Wrote something down. Before she left, she crouched cautiously in front of Bear. He didn't flinch. Didn't pull back. But his eyes met hers. And something in her softened. You're keeping them safe, she whispered. Then she stood and left. That night, I found Eva and Bear in the nursery again. But this time, something had changed. The lamb had been moved to the center of the rug. Eva sat on one side, Bear on the other. She was humming again. That low, tuneless melody that curled through the air like steam. And Bear, his head tilted to one side, as if trying to remember the song. Eva paused. Lifted the lamb. Held it out. Bear lowered his head and gently took the toy between his teeth. He didn't chew. Didn't play. He just held it. And in that gesture, I saw it, the shift. He was no longer waiting for the past to return. He was carrying it forward the only way he knew how. One breath. One step. One soft offering at a time.